Welcome to the Books of Titans podcast, hosted by Eric Rostad. Join him on his 15-year journey through the immortal books. He'll share what he's learning, explore profound ideas across time and cultures, and share the one thing he always hopes to remember from each immortal book.
Today I'm going to cover one of the most interesting philosophers of the Western world, Parmenides. So Robin Waterfield is who made that claim that Parmenides is one of the most interesting philosophers of the Western world. He also said he's the single most important pre-Socratic. So I've been covering the philosophers who were before Plato, who were before Socrates, and whose ideas we see a lot come up in Plato. Plato even has a dialogue that's called Parmenides, and that's one that I got stuck on. So I had started reading Plato last year and just realized I needed help in understanding what he was talking about because he kept referring to these earlier philosophers and these ideas that these philosophers had. I didn't know what those philosophers had said nor who they were, and so I decided to take a break from Plato and start reading some of these early Greek philosophers. And it was really when I came to the Parmenides dialogue where I had so much trouble with that dialogue, and I realized that I needed to do what I'm doing right now. So I'm glad to be learning about Parmenides here and talking about him today. Parmenides is the first pre-Socratic where we have a good number of intact fragments. So with all of these pre-Socratics and the sophists, we are dealing with fragments of their work. We don't really have complete works from any of them. And fragments are not what we may picture of like a piece of papyrus or something where we have a fragment that we know is their writing. The fragments in this case is more of like a third party idea where maybe Aristotle or Plato quoted these philosophers, and then we have that quote. So we're hoping that the quote is legitimate and exact and all that, but we don't really have their exact work. So we're dealing with a lot of fragments, and so we're trying to piece together what these people thought based upon these fragments. However, with Parmenides, we have a good number of these fragments that are intact, and Parmenides had one main work, and it was called On Nature. And if you look at these early Greek philosophers, most of them had a work that was called On Nature. It was kind of their physics for the day. It was their opus of all that they thought. And what's interesting about Parmenides On Nature is that it was set to verse, and it was set in a Homeric kind. Diogenes Laertius even said it was like Hesiod. So we've got this philosophy that's being written in verse like Homer and Hesiod, which I find really interesting. And this work was divided into two parts, the way of truth and the way of opinion. But the way that he kicks off the whole thing is that he presents it that he's getting a revelation from a goddess, almost like this like Lady Wisdom. And this is part of the work that we have intact, which is the start of it. And I want to read part of it because it's really interesting. But I believe it was Robin Waterfield who said that in presenting it this way, Parmenides is making a spiritual and philosophical journey, just as Homer's Odysseus, end quote. And I love that. Other writers did that throughout history, where they would take Homer as a foundation or a structure in which to base their own work. And here you have a similar setup, just in the spiritual and philosophical journey. So here we go. I'm going to read the very beginning and then skip ahead to what is said. So here we go. The mares that carry me as far as my heart may reach conveyed me. They had come and set me on the celebrated road of the goddess, which carries a man of knowledge ever straight ahead. There I was being carried, for there the wise mares were carrying me, straining at the chariot, and young girls were leading the way. Now I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit. And the goddess graciously received me and took my right hand in hers, and she spoke thus and addressed me, "Young man, companion to the immortal charioteers, who come to my house with the mares who carry you, welcome. For no evil fate sent you to travel this road, for indeed it is far from the tread of men, but right and justice. You must learn all things, both the unwavering heart of persuasive truth and the opinions of mortals, in which there is no true warranty. And I'll stop reading there. That's a great introduction there to the way of truth and the way of opinion. So both the unwavering heart of persuasive truth and the opinions of mortals, in which there is no true warranty. This really sets up the path in which the poem is organized. So the first part of it is the way of truth, and then the second part is the way of opinion. And this is a really important distinction for Parmenides, where the way of truth is the way of reason-based knowledge. So it's the thinking that leads to genuine knowledge of what is. The way of opinion is a sense-based opinion. So this is, he says it's unreliable and contradictory. So we've got kind of thinking versus sense perception. And Parmenides is 100% on the thinking side of things. Like he trusts that in thinking with logic and all that's going to lead to truth. Whereas our sense perception and that is just, it's unreliable, it's contradictory, and it's based upon opinion. So what he's done is set up these two paths, because what he is going to conclude with his philosophy is going to conflict with our senses. Like we're going to have to suspend belief in what we think we see in order to take in what he is telling us. So when that is the case, he wants us to follow logic and truth, not our senses. So let's keep that in mind for the rest of the episode, because the next thing, and this is Parmenides' most famous thing here, and the way I like to think of it and say it is this: bar your thought from what is not. It's easy to remember, right? Bar your thought from what is not. We saw this come up in Plato's dialogues. I talked about this in some of those episodes, but in Plato's Sophist, he quotes Parmenides of saying this: "Never will this prevail," he says, "that what is not is. Bar your thought from this road of inquiry." So what is being said there is that what is everything. And you cannot even speak about what is not, because if you even start to think about it or speak about it, then it becomes something. You can't think about nothing. You can't speak about nothing, because it starts to become something as you do that very act. So you can't even think about what is not. And if you can't do that, then it can't logically be real. So here's where he's starting to go in the logical side of things. Nothing can't exist, because it can't logically be real if it's not there. So this is where Parmenides goes with being. And this is really the foundation of his thinking. You have being, and then, well, you don't have not being, because it doesn't exist. So you just have being. And being is what is. It's not born, it's not divisible, it's imperishable, it's complete, it's perfect. The question here is, can something come from nothing? Well, no, because nothing doesn't exist in Parmenides' world, so that's impossible, because nothing does not exist. So only something could come from something else, and that something is being. And that being then must be eternal, because it's not something that can be created. It has always been. It was not born. So you can see where Plato is taking these ideas and going into the eternal forms. So a further ramification of this is that change and motion are impossible, because for something to change, non-being would have to separate the parts of being. And if non-being doesn't exist, then change doesn't exist, and motion is not possible. And so this is where things get hard, at least for me, to understand, because I see change, I see motion. He's saying these things are not possible, and it's an illusion of our senses. And here's where we can't trust in those. We've got to trust in the rational reality, the truth that being is it, and then not being is not possible. This really becomes the puzzle of Parmenides that all philosophers afterwards have to deal with. If you're going to say that change and motion are impossible, how do you explain what you experience with your senses? So if change exists, you've got to find the flaw in Parmenides' argument here, and that's why he had such an impact on philosophy after that. Philosophers all had to address this issue. And so what Plato did is he divided things into the eternal forms and then a world of change and a world of shadows. So things could move and things could change in the world, but where the eternal forms were in the heavens, those were the unchanging things, what Parmenides called being. Democritus, who I covered a couple weeks ago, he said that everything was based upon atoms. That was the foundation of everything. But he said atoms and void. So void allowed there to be motion and for things to move into areas of void. These atoms could do that, and then these atoms could combine and form compounds and form change. And so that's how Democritus responded to this puzzle of Parmenides. A few other things about Parmenides is that he was the first to declare that the earth was spherical and that it lies in the middle of the universe. He also said the moon got light from the sun. One other really interesting thing with all of these early Greek philosophers, we see a foundational element, a first principle. And in one of the parts here, this comes from the Oxford work about Parmenides called The First Philosophers. And I want to read one part here from one of the fragments. And actually, this is the commentary by Robin Waterfield, but it's based upon one of the fragments. He says this: there is some evidence that Parmenides postulated a goddess, love, as the primary force of cosmic creation, as well as of animal procreation. And I'll stop reading there. I'm really interested in that because I had mentioned, I think I wrote an article on Substack where if this first principle idea with the early Greek philosophers, I love that idea. And it's just got me thinking as I'm reading other things, like what's the first principle of this author? What's my first principle? What's the first principle of these other books? And I started here reading the Bible. And so I was just thinking about that. Like if I was to narrow the Bible down to a first principle, something that lays the foundation for everything else, what would I say that would be? And there's a number of different answers you could give for that. But one thing I was thinking of was love, that love is the foundational thing. It's always something that really strikes me when I'm reading the Bible. Like you don't see the Greek gods, their foundation being love, but you see that in throughout the Bible. And so I was wondering, were there any philosophers who thought that, early Greek philosophers? And Empedocles thought that love was one of the drivers of the elements, but it wasn't the foundational thing, but it was kind of a driver of the four elements. But here there's evidence that Parmenides perhaps thought that love was the prime force of cosmic creation. So that's cool. Again, we've lost a lot of his work. We just have fragments. So, but I think that's a really interesting thing to consider. Just a little bit about Parmenides here. He lived between 515 and 450 BC. He was born in Elea, which is a Greek foundation area in southern Italy. So that's one other thing that's been really interesting to me as I've been going through these early Greek philosophers is that I always assume or think of Athens as being the focal point for all of this. But many of them came from Asia Minor and Italy, and then either came to Athens. I don't think Parmenides went, lived in Athens, but he was born in Elea, and there were a number of philosophers from that area, and they call it like there's the Eleatic idea, in really based on this of you can't even speak about what is not in being and all that. So this area, and then obviously Parmenides had a huge influence on philosophy. I'm going to read one thing about Parmenides and where he lived. This is from Plutarch, writing about Parmenides. And he says this, Parmenides organized his own country by the best laws, so that each year the citizens still get the officials to swear that they will abide by Parmenides' laws, end quote. So that's interesting, and that refers to Elea. So apparently Parmenides wrote the laws that they abided by for a while. Some of the contemporaries of Parmenides were Xenophanes and Ammianius. I want to read one other thing, and this comes from Diogenes Laertius in Lives of the Eminent Philosophers. I've really been enjoying going through this as I've been reading about the early Greek philosophers. And what he does, it's kind of funny, but he just he compiles like all of the information about these philosophers, but so much of it contradicts. So he's like, this person said this about him, and then this person said this, and it's like, not even possible, like different fathers, different places of birth and all that. But it is interesting just to get an idea of what people were thinking there. So here is, he says this, it was about him that Plato wrote a dialogue with the title Parmenides, or Concerning Ideas, end quote. So I mentioned at the beginning that was the dialogue of Plato that I had a lot of trouble with. And I just like that other name of that dialogue, either Parmenides or Concerning Ideas. And then he shows up in Sophist as well by Plato. So I can't wait to go back to Plato now and read some of these dialogues again, just getting to know a little bit more about Parmenides and what he thought. So if I were to narrow this down to one thing Parmenides thought, it would be that he thought that the senses could be tricked, and that logic that is done well, thinking that is done well, it can't. And this really set the stage for the philosophical tradition of seeking after truth through logic, not just depending upon what we could see, but really pursuing truth through logic, and just to see the ramifications for that, to see the ramifications of having to deal with this puzzle that Parmenides introduced. And it just creates a helpful framework to see why Plato and Democritus and other philosophers were saying what they were saying. They in some part, they were responding to this puzzle of Parmenides. So it's really interesting to know that puzzle and then to see how they're responding. So in conclusion, Parmenides was one of the single most important philosophers of early Greek philosophy. He's someone who broke my brain when I read Plato's Parmenides. So I'm glad I got to know him a little bit more here, and looking forward to going back to Plato. So I'll probably do a few more episodes about some of these early Greek philosophers, and then my plan now with May starting is to get back into Plato, and I'm just going to really focus on Plato for a while. He's got 30 plus dialogues. I've read 9 of them. I may reread some of them, and then I just plan to read all of Plato's works. So that's what I'll be doing, and I'll be covering some of those dialogues, if not all of them, in different episodes coming up. So I hope you follow along. Be sure to subscribe on Substack, and check out my social media platforms on Twitter, X, and Instagram. It's just @BooksOfTitans. So follow me there. If you have a question or a comment about this episode, feel free to leave that on Substack, just in the comment section, or you can email me at eric@booksoftitans.com. Thank you for listening. I'll be back next week with another episode. Until then, keep reading, keep learning, and keep listening. I'm out.